Hey again guys, it's Jacob, your assistant youth worker here at St Ed's. I do hope you're all doing well. So usually on a Friday, I would be expanding on what we learned on a Wednesday, our youth group, but this week on Wednesday we watched a film actually. It was film night for half term. We watched a film called Inside Out. Now the film was about a girl who had run away from home. She'd had her joy taken away from her, and it tells of how her emotions led her to do different things and how she experienced that. And so today I'm going to be talking about a similar thing that happened to a man whose joy was taken from him, and it's going to be a testimony of how that affected his life and the decisions that he made, and how eventually he came from having his joy completely taken from him to coming to the cross and turning into a worldwide influencer. So I'm talking about a man called C.S. Lewis, incredibly famous. If you wouldn't have heard of him, your parents definitely will have. He was a Christian theologian, a Christian author, and an academic. He held high positions for English literature in Oxford and Cambridge University, among other scholars in England. But he wasn't always a theologian and he wasn't always a Christian. So let's start with his upbringing. He was born in Belfast, Ireland in 1898, and his upbringing, his childhood was described as the ideal. Him and his brother would play all day long, would invent games, they were academic. He read books with his brother all day long, and he just enjoyed life. His nurse would describe him as just a joyful, carefree young man. But all this until his mother, at the age of 9, when C.S. Lewis was 9, sadly, very sadly, passed away. C.S. Lewis's father could not deal with this grief, this loss, and so sent him and his brother away to boarding school. And this sort of marked the end of his settled happiness in his upbringing, in his childhood. Now, C.S. Lewis was brought up a religious boy. He was ordered to pray certain prayers at certain times throughout the day, and he was brought along to church by his parents. And he sincerely tried to be serious about this stuff and really believe in God, to a point where in his evening prayers, he really did believe that every single word that he said, he had to be completely believing in. So if there was any hint of doubt as he prayed, he'd have to start again until he fully believed in what he was saying. And it was because of this that he said if he kept on praying this way and being religious this way, it would have driven him mental. He would have gone crazy. So he left. He stopped believing in God, and this started his atheist phase. Now, an atheist is someone who lacks the belief in the existence of a God or gods, and so this started his atheistic period in his life. So his sadness, his loss, his grief, all these circumstances led him away from God, and he essentially believed that if there was a God that created a world, then it certainly wouldn't be a world that we live in today with all the brokenness, the loss, the death, etc. And so he became totally opposed to the belief that there is a God who loves us. This story is heartbreaking. In his cynicism, he genuinely believed that life was just meaningless. All the things that he loved were just a dream, and just didn't exist. And so his view of life was so dark and so gloomy, but in his imagination, he loved to learn about truth and goodness and beauty, and loved to read new books. And eventually he stumbled across a book called The Everlasting Man by Christian author G.K. Chesterton, and his conclusion was that Christians were they're very sensible about what they write, but he still didn't believe in Jesus. He said that Christians are very sensible apart from their Christianity. And so he was beginning to be influenced by these Christian leaders, and he realized that a lot of the Christian leaders, or just the leaders actually at Oxford University, were Christians, and he began to really like their writings. And so one by one, his objections sort of intellectually about there being a God were starting to fall away. C.S. Lewis went on a journey about exploring faith. He read more and more books that intellectually persuaded him that there is a God. Now, in his heart, he didn't emotionally agree with God, but he knew in his mind that there was a God. He describes a bus journey in his life where he had a lot of time to think to himself. We don't know where he was going. He was just on this bus, And he suddenly felt this feeling as if he'd been holding something at bay. He had this thing and he was just holding it back. This sudden realization that he was in this situation where he could either open the door or just keep it closed and turn a blind eye to it. But he said that to not open this door was just impossible. He couldn't resist but to go through and explore this new avenue. And so there and then he confessed. He didn't want God, but he knew that God existed. And it was at that point that he changed from atheism to theism, the belief that there is a God. He is described famously as the most reluctant convert ever. He didn't want God. He was opposed to God. He didn't like God because of the experiences that he had, but he knew that God existed. And this spiraled. And in a couple of years after that, he gave his life to Jesus and became a full-blown follower of Christ. C.S. Lewis went on to be possibly the most highly regarded Christian writer of our time. For example, he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, which is a Christian book about Christian things. Read it through that lens and you'll understand what I mean. It was later made into a film. You'll definitely have seen it. If not, I encourage you to do so. He went from a place where his joy had completely gone. He had no joy left. It had totally left him. A life of meaninglessness, of self-scrutiny, to a life of new joy, newfound joy in knowing and loving and treasuring Christ. This is the testimony of C.S. Lewis, from atheist to reluctant convert to Christian writer and lover of God and others. I hope this has encouraged you guys, and my prayer for you is that you'll get this revelation as well, that true joy is found in knowing and treasuring Christ alone. But for now, take care, and God bless you.